If another Asian country, Japan, could become an economic powerhouse, why couldn't India? The question will attract a lot of self-flagellation, about how Indians are less hard-working, how they are not technically minded, how they are trapped in regressive social systems, and so on. Some might say, despite the British colonial regime bestowing on India modern infrastructure, we still could not make good use of that, and develop our country. It is less likely that anyone would proffer an answer from India. Japan, during the Meiji period, from the mid-19th century to early 20th century, embarked on a massive industrialization drive, exporting commodities and importing Western technology, building railway and telegraph, and various industries. India was very much capable of the same, but for the simple reason that it had little money to invest in industries and import machines and technology from the West. Indians were instead dying in famines. And that too, when India ran a huge trade surplus with the rest of the world. Where did India's money go? Patnaik, an economic historian, set about to find the answer, and published her research in 2017, establishing that the British colonial regime looted nearly $45 trillion from India, from 1765 to 1938. The amount is 15 times the annual monetary value of the UK today. Even if it wants, it still can't return India the money it looted, to not only build itself as a major global power, but also fund much of the development in the today's developed world. How did Britain pull off the Great Heist? It happened through the trade system. Prior to the colonial period, Britain bought goods like textiles and rice from Indian producers, and paid for them in the normal way, mostly with silver, as they did with any other country. But something changed in 1765, shortly after the East India Company took control of the subcontinent, and established a monopoly over Indian trade. Here's how it worked. The East India Company began collecting taxes in India, and then cleverly used a portion of those revenues, about a third, to fund the purchase of Indian goods for British use. In other words, instead of paying for Indian goods out of their own pocket, British traders acquired them for free, buying from peasants and weavers, using money that had just been taken from them. It was a scam, theft on a grand scale. Yet most Indians were unaware of what was going on, because the agent who collected the taxes was not the same as the one who showed up to buy their goods. Had it been the same person, they surely would have smelled a rat. Some of the stolen goods were consumed in Britain, and the rest were re-exported elsewhere. The re-export system allowed Britain to finance a flow of imports from Europe, including strategic materials like iron, tar and timber, which were essential to Britain's industrialization. Indeed, the Industrial Revolution depended in large part on this systematic theft from India. On top of this, the British were able to sell the stolen goods to other countries for much more than they bought them for in the first place, pocketing not only 100% of the original value of the goods, but also the markup. After the British Raj took over in 1858, colonizers added a special new twist to the tax and buy system. As the East India Company's monopoly broke down, Indian producers were allowed to export their goods directly to other countries. But Britain made sure that the payments for those goods nonetheless ended up in London. How did this work? Basically, anyone who wanted to buy goods from India would do so using special council bills, a unique paper currency, issued only by the British Crown. And the only way to get those bills was to buy them from London with gold or silver. So traders would pay London in gold to get the bills, and then use the bills to pay Indian producers. When Indians cashed the bills in at the local colonial office, they were paid in rupees out of tax revenues, money that had just been collected from them. So, once again, they were not in fact paid at all, they were defrauded. Meanwhile, London ended up with all of the gold and silver that should have gone directly to the Indians in exchange for their exports. This corrupt system meant that, even while India was running an impressive trade surplus with the rest of the world, a surplus that lasted for 3 decades in the early 20th century, it showed up as a deficit in the national accounts because the real income from India's exports was appropriated in its entirety by Britain. Some point to this fictional deficit as evidence that India was a liability to Britain. But exactly the opposite is true. Britain intercepted enormous quantities of income that rightly belonged to Indian producers. India was the goose that laid the golden egg. Meanwhile, the deficit meant that India had no option but to borrow from Britain to finance its imports. So the entire Indian population was forced into completely unnecessary debt to their colonial overlords, further cementing British control. And that's not all. Britain used this flow of tribute from India to finance the expansion of capitalism in Europe and regions of European settlement, like Canada and Australia. So not only the industrialization of Britain, but also the industrialization of much of the Western world, was facilitated by extraction from the colonies. Patnaik identifies 4 distinct economic periods in colonial India from 1765 to 1938, calculates the extraction. She finds that the total drain amounts to $44.6 trillion. This figure is conservative, she says, and does not include the debts that Britain imposed on India during the Raj. What does this require of Britain today? An apology? Absolutely. Reparations? Perhaps, although there is not enough money in all of Britain to cover the sums that Patnaik identifies. In the meantime, we can start by setting the story straight. We need to recognize that Britain retained control of India not out of benevolence, but for the sake of plunder, and that Britain's industrial rise didn't emerge sui generis, from the steam engine and strong institutions, as our schoolbooks would have it, but depended on violent theft from other lands and other peoples. Hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.